People always warn you about strangers. Lock your doors, watch your back, and don't trust someone you just met. But nobody warns you about the person who has a key to your house and knows your coffee order by heart. Nobody warns you about your best friend. The person who broke me wasn't an enemy. My name is Nadia, and she was the only person I ever trusted completely, which made it impossible to hate her. Sara and I met at 9 years old, two girls on the same street who both secretly hated the first day of school. She was loud where I was quiet, bold where I was careful, and we balanced each other perfectly for 20 years. 20 years of shared secrets, midnight phone calls, borrowed clothes, and absolute, unconditional honesty. She was the person I measured every relationship against. If Sara thought he was good, then he was good. I should have trusted myself instead of putting my entire world into her hands. I met Adam at Sara's birthday dinner. He was her quiet, funny colleague who worked as an architect. Sara introduced us with pure pride, saying, "You two are going to love each other, I can already tell." We dated for 8 months before he proposed on a Tuesday, right on the kitchen floor while assembling furniture badly. I said yes immediately, and Sara cried at our engagement party even harder than my own mother did. I thought she was crying because she knew we were right for each other. I didn't understand what she actually knew. The year before the wedding was the happiest of my life as Adam and I chose our first bright apartment together. Sara helped me choose my bridal dress, sitting in the shop for 4 hours until she pointed and said, "Nadia, that one." As my maid of honor, she gave a speech at the rehearsal dinner that made the whole room laugh and cry at the same time. "Adam," she said, raising her glass with a smile, "you are marrying the best person I know. Please know that every single day." He smiled back at her, and I thought it was just love between close friends. I had no idea what it actually was. It started with small, quiet things that I didn't know how to name or talk about at the time. The way Sara's eyes always found Adam first when she walked into a room, before they ever looked at me. The way he laughed differently with her, looser, less careful. The way you laugh when the work of impressing is already done. I saw a text on his phone by accident one evening that read, "Today was hard. Thank you for listening." I told myself I was being paranoid because they worked together, protecting a perfect life I could not afford to lose. We had been married for 11 months when I came home totally unannounced from a work trip because of a canceled flight. The apartment windows were lit from the inside with a warm, golden glow, but there were no cars or voices outside. I put my key in the lock, walked inside, and my entire reality permanently shattered in a single second. I will not describe what I saw. Some sharp images belong only to the place behind the eyes where things cannot be unseen. It was Sara, and the look on her face wasn't shock. It was the look of someone who had been waiting for this moment. I don't remember leaving the apartment, but I remember sitting on a cold pharmacy bench in the mid-November rain. My phone kept lighting up with missed calls from Adam and Sara, so I turned it face down on the wet wood beside me. I sat there looking at the street and thought about the night my father died and how Sara had held my hand on the hospital floor. She had sat in total silence with me for 6 hours because she knew words were useless and presence was everything. That was the Sara who had loved me for 20 years. Who was the woman I had just seen, and which one was real? Sara came to my mother's house the next morning because she always faced things, and I let her in out of 20 years of habit. I made 2 cups of tea, and we sat at the kitchen table, just like we had done 10,000 times before in our lives. She cried and said it had started 6 months before the wedding, a late night at work that went somewhere neither planned. She claimed she tried to stop it and told herself she could stand at my altar, carry the secret alone, and protect me. "You weren't protecting me, Sara," I said quietly, looking at her tears. "You were protecting yourself from this exact look." Adam came that evening, sitting across from me without a single excuse or the usual language of self-justification. "I am so sorry, Nadia," he said, his voice heavy. "Not for getting caught, but for being the kind of person who could do this." Then he added something I never expected. "She loved you more than she loved me. She ended it 4 times because of you." "I was the one who kept pushing," he whispered, but I looked at him coldly and replied, "That doesn't make it better." He said, "I know. Nothing makes it better, but I needed you to know that you were always more important to her." My mother asked what I was going to do. My sister told me to leave him immediately, and everyone had a clean next step. They were experiencing my tragedy from a comfortable distance, but nobody tells you how messy this grief actually is. It is not the clean grief of losing an enemy. It is the trauma of losing a person who is woven into your entire existence. Every childhood memory, every photograph, and every version of myself that I became had Sara standing right next to me. You cannot just cut 20 years of your life out. You can only learn to carry the heavy weight of it differently. I filed for divorce 3 weeks later, not in a wave of loud anger, but in a quiet, exhausted clarity that felt nothing like the movies. There was no dramatic screaming or confrontation in the rain, just 2 people sitting across from a lawyer dividing a new life. Adam signed everything without an argument and took almost nothing, leaving the apartment completely empty on the final day. He stood in the doorway of the room where we had badly built furniture and whispered, "I'm sorry," for the 100th time. "I know," I replied. Some apologies cannot be accepted. They can only be received like an old letter and locked away. After that first morning confrontation, Sara completely disappeared from my life and didn't try to contact me again. No text messages or calls, even on the days she knew would be unbearable, like my birthday or the anniversary of my father's death. At first, I felt grateful for the silence. Then I felt furious, and finally, I felt deeply ashamed because I actively missed her. I didn't miss what she had done, but I desperately missed the girl on the bench at 9 years old who knew me inside out. Losing the version of a person you deeply needed them to be is a nameless grief that has no clean ending. 4 months later, at 11:30 on a Tuesday night, my hands dialed Sara's number before my mind could even stop them. Tuesdays had always been our designated day to talk for no reason, and she answered the call on the very second ring. After a long, breathless silence, she whispered, "I didn't think you'd ever call." And I replied, "I didn't think I would either." We both admitted we felt terrible, and in the most broken, absurd way, we almost laughed because the alternative was collapsing. "I'm not forgiving you," I stated firmly. "I know," she wept. "I just know you've been destroying yourself every day since." People expected me to be purely angry because anger has a clear shape, a defined victim, a villain, and a satisfying story. But what I felt had no shape. I was grieving the husband I loved, the best friend I needed, and the naive version of myself. Underneath all the pain was a truth I couldn't say out loud. I understood exactly how it happened without excusing it. Sara had not fallen in love with Adam to deliberately hurt me. She had fallen in love with him despite loving me, completely. That agonizing distinction is what made it impossible for me to simply hate her, throw her away, and move on with my life. 6 months after the divorce, a handwritten letter arrived in Sara's familiar, slightly chaotic handwriting. She didn't ask for my forgiveness, but she wrote about the night my father died and how she had sat with me on the hospital floor. "I forgot for too long that losing you would be far worse than losing Adam," she wrote. "By the time I remembered, it was inevitable. Not a day passes when I don't realize exactly what I threw away. You were the absolute best thing in my life, Nadia," she concluded. I read her words twice, put the paper safely inside a bedroom drawer, and though I never wrote back, I didn't throw it away. Nobody tells you how incredibly strange it is to completely rebuild your life when there is no clear villain to blame. Anger is fuel, but I had used all of mine up trying to hate two people my heart simply wouldn't let me fully hate. I moved into a small, quiet, one-bedroom apartment and started running until my body was too tired to feel sad. I went to therapy, and my therapist told me something during our 3rd session that I wrote down on a piece of paper. Grief without a clean villain asks you to hold anger and love for the same person at the same time. That is human complexity. 14 months after that devastating November night, I woke up on an ordinary Saturday morning and waited for the heavy weight. But the crushing chest pain didn't settle in. It felt lighter, the way a faded scar feels compared to an open, bleeding wound. Calm exhale. I made my coffee and sat by the window, watching a woman walking her dog and a child riding a bicycle on the street. I thought about Adam, and I thought about Sara, and I thought about the little 9-year-old girl who hated the first day of school. Then I looked at the independent woman sitting in this quiet apartment, and I realized she survived it, and she is still me. Her name was Priya. She moved into the apartment right above mine and knocked on my door to ask about the fuse box. Neither of us knew how to fix electrical problems, and we ended up laughing helplessly together in the middle of the hallway. We had coffee, then dinner, and within a few months, she naturally became the new person I called on Tuesday nights. When I finally told her the complicated story about Sara, she listened quietly without rushing to pass a harsh verdict. "That sounds like a pain that never goes away, but becomes something you can carry," she said, a small line that meant everything. Here is what I know now that I didn't understand before. Betrayal is not always born out of pure malice or cruelty. Sometimes it is just a desperate, weak person drowning in an unexpected storm and grabbing whatever is nearest to them. They don't do it because they don't love you. They do it because they are too busy drowning to think about what they are crushing. That is absolutely not an excuse to stay, nor is it a reason to immediately forgive them on anyone else's schedule.
But facing the full, messy truth of human weakness is the only way I have ever found to actually move my life forward. I ran into Sara by accident at a local coffee shop 2 years later, a sudden coincidence that felt far too pointed to be random. She looked thinner, like someone who had been carrying a heavy brick inside her chest and had stopped pretending otherwise. We stood just 3 feet apart in the crowded room while the world moved around us, and neither of us spoke for a long time. "You look good, Nadia," she finally whispered, and I looked at her directly and replied honestly, "I feel good, Sara." At the door, she turned back one last time and said, "The 9-year-old girl, she was the best friend I ever had." "Me too," I replied. I kept Sara's handwritten letter inside my bedside table drawer, and I kept all of our old photographs stored away too. Erasing 20 years of genuine, beautiful friendship just to protect yourself from the current pain is its own kind of lie. The good years were real, the hospital floor was real, and what happened after does not magically unmake what came before. I was deeply loved by Sara for 20 years, and then I was completely failed by her. Both of those statements are completely true. I have stopped torturing myself trying to decide which of those two truths matters most to my future. The painful truth is that the people who hurt us most in this life are rarely absolute monsters. Monsters are easy to spot. The people who break us are usually just flawed human beings who loved imperfectly and chose badly in a moment of extreme weakness. That doesn't mean you owe them a second chance, and it doesn't mean the agonizing pain they caused is any smaller. It just means the world is far more complicated than the simple stories of good versus evil we are told as children. Surviving true betrayal asks you to grieve without a villain and to step forward into a life that is completely yours. My name is Nadia. I am the girl who trusted completely, was broken completely, and decided to get up anyway. Not because I was incredibly strong. I cried in my car and dialed her number on Tuesdays because my hands remembered the habit. And not because I have magically forgiven her. I have not, because forgiveness is a long direction, not a quick destination. But I got up because moving forward was the only option left to me if I wanted to live an honest, authentic life. Humans do not heal from trauma in perfect straight lines. They heal in slow circles, in small apartments, 1 cup of coffee at a time. Thank you for joining us for this emotional journey on English Story Hub. If Sara had told Nadia the complete truth before the wedding day, do you think it would have changed anything? Tell me your honest thoughts in the comments below, because I read every single perspective. If Nadia's survival and raw honesty resonated with your heart today, please like, share, and subscribe. See you in the next story. Goodbye.